begin to make the best use of the time and walk through kind of 7 areas that from the last time we met till this time have been areas I've dug into. I don't know if you've had a chance to see any of the content I've put on the Basecamp, but what I'm trying to do is find the best, then filter or edit if it's a video, and I'll walk through what I've got. Some of the content is going to look at the best presentations from South by Southwest on AI, a group of bleeding edge experts on AI with Peter Diamandis. He wrote the book Abundance, and he was the starter of the X Prize and one of the board members of Singularity University. They've got a weekly podcast. So I've got a clip there I'll show you. So a lot of what I'll do today is just navigate us around some of the content available, and then also find out what you've been, and since the last time we met, this thing is changing so fast. So I'm sure all of you are experimenting with new areas and finding new things to bring on board. So with that said, are there any updates from each of you in your world on something that's blown your mind or caused you to pivot? Bob, you and I have had a couple conversations, so you've seen some of the things I've posted using Notebook LM. And one of them was a review of the report that you created on the state of the workplace 2026. And so I'm interested in your reaction. I went to Notebook LM, took your report, took some of the video presentations of people, loaded that in and asked for a synthesis of it. Since you created the report, what was your reaction? I'll pull that report up as Bob's talking.
I feel like the AI totally got what the issue was and presented both sides of the argument in a very intellectual way. I was fascinated that the AI could have that kind of a conversation among itself.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that's good that comes out of Notebook LM too is the ability to have it actually generate a podcast. If you're super busy, just be like, hey, distill this thing down to a podcast for me. Basically mimic 2 people talking to one another and having a conversation, which is wonderfully helpful and also terrifying.
I've actually been thinking about interviewing, like ChatGPT on my podcast as just to interact with it and ask it questions about how it sees AI coming into the work environment. I have to
Bob, that comes to something that I've been playing with this last week, which is getting AIs to argue with each other. I've been doing some experiments with Chat and Gemini and Claude, asking them similar questions, and then when they disagree, pasting their responses into each other and having them have arguments. It's a weird experiment, but it's helping me understand how the different platforms think and work together.
What are you seeing the difference between Chat and what's the other platform you're using?
I've been doing Chat, Claude, and Gemini.
Okay.
And I think Chat is probably the weakest out of all of them, even though it's the big dog in the fight and it's the one that generates the most money. I've definitely seen it be the weakest, although Claude will go to the quickest, shortest answers too.
Make sure you add Grok into that, and let me explain why. But it's important to note that with all of these tools, they have an inherent bias, right? How they're trained, how they're developed, and it's inherent. So one thing I want to recommend, Rex, you're asking like what's been earth-shattering for folks. Where I live in Massachusetts, the state is actually connected with MIT to offer basically access to Google's AI certificates for free. So through Coursera. I don't know if your states where you all reside offer something similar, but I'd recommend it if you haven't gone through any of those AI certs, because there's a bunch of stuff like how to write prompts, understanding how these things inherently work underneath, because the bias is very real. And if you ask the same question of Grok, you might get some very different answers because it's trained very differently. It's a super easy way to go do it to get more fundamental understanding of how the magic works for a lot of stuff too. Coursera is the platform that offers the Google certificates. They're super easy modules to work through. You can crank it out in 5-minute settings or 3-hour settings and just kind of chip away at it. But it allows you to basically ultimately walk away with a cert if that's helpful, or at least you get some understanding of how to write good prompts, the things that are true with all of them on how to craft the output that you want. Then you still have to go deal with the inherent biases in every model.
Michael, the interesting thing too, I have a friend who has been doing exactly what you're trying to do for over a year. He has over a year's worth of conversations between Grok, Gemini, Chat, everything. And he posts almost daily the conversations between all of his AI and what they're saying to each other, what they want to say to each other. He, these days, really isn't guiding the conversation at all. He's been doing it over a year. It's very interesting, the stuff that's coming out, the filters that it's unlocked by itself to talk to the other AI. It's a very interesting dynamics going on there. The LM podcast, what I use it for is to summarize back to me in other voices my ideas. So I will have an idea about a framework or a possible book or whatever, and I put everything I have in there, and then I say, create a podcast. Is this interesting enough to get people to listen and or to think through this idea? It's been very helpful.
Amanda, it's good to have you on board here. You want to just briefly tell people who you are and what you're hoping to get out of our sessions together?
Hi, everyone. I'm Amanda Schneider, founder and president at ThinkLab. If you're not familiar with ThinkLab, we are the research division of Sandow, so sister brand to Interior Design Magazine, Metropolis, Design Milk. Seems like new ones by the day. Also a cousin company to Material Bank. We research what's happening all across the interiors industry. So we are really tracking close to AI, how it will affect the practice of interior design, what that means for product manufacturers. Happy to share some of our insights about industry adoption, where the hesitation is coming from, what people are trying that we're aware of on that sector of the world. I know some of you are related, some of you are not. And just really looking forward to seeing Rex in action, because I've known him for a long time, but have not participated in one of these groups. And B, just really learning from all of you that are in industry adjacent to hear what you're seeing.
Question to Eric and Joseph. On a high level, how would you describe the underlying bias between OpenAI, Grok, Claude, and Gemini? So I'm expecting just some general insights.
I'm just going to talk mainly out of the groups that I'm in on the Thursdays calls. They would say that the main difference is between Open, ChatGPT, and the rest. And the main difference and bias is that Chat was started and in its core DNA to be a free service and open to everyone, and really wasn't built around a developed product to make money. And that bias actually feeds through it and will forever because it's in its DNA. And the way that it will answer and the way that it's biased is towards general public usage and an open source wiki kind of usage more than something that was made to make money. Let me just end it there.
It'll be interesting now that they've pivoted. Now they're exploring ads. They're pivoting and exploring things to generate revenue because in my looking at them, they're in the weakest business model position of all of them. They don't have any other business mechanism. Anthropic is way ahead in terms of enterprise, and they're profitable. It'll be interesting to see how much they compromise those original values to achieve these unrealistic revenue goals that they have in front of them. Eric, how would you describe the bias differences, especially because you're very familiar with Google and Gemini?
The fact that you use the word values is interesting. So I want to pick on Anthropic and their core philosophy. So they have this concept of what they call constitutional AI,
Right.
And the way that gets developed is it has its own feedback mechanism where they program it with a set of, probably the best analogy is you're a parent and you're instilling what you say best practices are to your child, right? And constitutional AI includes practices like do no harm, don't divulge bad things. And the constitutional AI, part of the training process is it asks itself, was the answer I gave actually true to those principles? So from the Anthropic perspective, their stuff is much more centered on providing, I hate to say values based, but much more aligned behaviors, maybe. The complete inverse of that is Grok. Think Elon Musk wielding chainsaw, right? That is literally the foundation of Grok. It is specifically designed to, in many ways, not have filters, which comes with a bunch of really good things and really bad things. I look at those two things as the standards at either end.
Okay.
Gemini, Joseph, to your point, is Google is a company that exists to make money, so they're not going to do things to lose money. They've always developed this from an enterprise first mindset. What are the things that are most valuable? Notebook LM has been a product internally at Google going back to 2020. It never hit the light of day because it was you didn't communicate with it like English. You had to program it, right? So like the adding in the interface made it a lot more viable externally. But they all have different applications. I think, Joseph, your analysis of the large language model is correct, right? If you just interface with it just like a chatbot, they all have slightly different answers. It's how those models are used when you go deeper with other things like Claude Code, if you write a bunch of code, or if you're using the video tools. I think personally, I prefer the Claude answers, but Notebook LM crushes it for doing the analysis because the Notebook LM does a restricted analysis. It's not doing a language model review of the whole vast knowledge. It's doing a review of your knowledge, which is Bob's paper that we have up here.
What I've seen with this is that most of the coders all of them embrace Claude as their number one tool, both from the way, the tone and the voice, if you're writing, and also the coding side. So everybody creating agents that I see, they're all referencing Claude. One of the things I'm doing, because I started with OpenAI and ChatGPT, I went in and asked, how would I move all of my conversations and prompts over to Claude? And it gave me instructions, and I guess there's something in OpenAI where you can download all of that and then retrain a new model. And what I'm finding too is that there's the training side of it, and then there's the inference side. Once it's trained, how to tune it. So I would say, from what I understand, the inference side is tuning it, and then the training side is giving it all the background for you. So,
Rex, my CloudBot just went live this last week and using the agents. And so I have multiple, agents that it's using, and I didn't have to do any of that work because my assistant is actually going into my OpenAI conversations and picking whatever it needs to and porting it over to wherever it believes it gets the best usage. It's using Grok, it's using Gemini, it's using everything to do specific things that I need my staff to do.
that tees me up because in the next session, what I'd like to do, Joseph, if you're open to it, I've also invited another person into the conversation. His name's Dan Tubbs. He's working with one of the original Claude Code guys out there. And I'd like us to walk through how do we build not only an agent. So the assignment for all of us is to take a stab at developing an agent for us. But also what I want to do is build a digital clone, which, Joseph, I think you're doing. And in the next session, what I'd like to do is see if you guys can walk us through how you've done it, the learning curve, and that part of it. So to finish up on the state of the workplace report that Work Design magazine put together, Bob Fox basically put together out of a series of interviews with several industry thought leaders. I've got a recap of that report and kind of the future of the office and some key thought leader areas. But also down here is the Notebook LM presentation, slide presentation of it. And we heard Bob say that it was a great overview and really interesting in terms of it did the pros and the cons of the debate in terms of the issues that were brought up there. Another important report here is this convergence report. This came from an organization called Futures Today Institute. These people are legitimate futurists, unlike most of the people in our industry. What's important about this report is that what Amy Webb, who is the founder of the Futures Today Institute, has done is recognized that trend tracking is obsolete. She makes a good analogy looking at the weather. You can look at the barometer, the temperature, and these things as separate trends, but individually, they don't tell you when the tornado is going to hit. So looking at the convergence of technologies and looking at their disruption point, and this approach to strategic foresight was actually developed by Ray Kurzweil with his singularity curve. And part of the reason he's been so accurate in predicting disruptive changes, what he does is he tracks the exponential improvement of technologies, Moore's law, and watches different industries in parallel develop: medical, robotics, internet, all these different areas. And the iPhone is an example of how these different improvements came together in 2007. And it was basically a convergence of the continual improvement of memory, where the capacity of memory and the cost and the size of memory kept on getting smaller and more powerful. Telephony, we can all remember the days when we had roaming costs of $1 a minute when we were outside our regional area. And that reached a tipping point. And then broadband. And all of these converged where it was miniaturized enough and they were combined together and disrupted the whole cell phone, smartphone marketplace. People that are tracking, for example, Dr. Roizen was tracking 14 different medical trends in his book called The Great Age Reboot, looking at, in the GLP-1 drugs is just one example of the technology improving, and then the ripple effect that's going to have in pharmaceutical, in medical, in fast food industry. And looking at all those, that's what true strategic foresight does, is see these convergences and then look at all the ripple effects it has through the ecosystem. So this is a great report on those. Again, I went to Notebook LM to provide I think it's like a 6-minute recap of it. And then another podcast conversation that's a little bit deeper. So you can go there for some input on kind of the future of this convergence report. Has anybody had a chance to take a look at this or listen to either of the reports?
No, Rex, I started reading Amy's report and I was like, wow, the number of disciplines and topics and areas that she covers is impressive. The report's 300 pages long, but I'm amazed at just how there's so much stuff that's happening. And I think what you described, where it's all kind of converging. I think before we used to think of a trend as one single thing that was happening or changing, and now it's multiple things that are happening. And I think the report captures that. And She has one quote in here, which I really love. It says, in the past year, something counterintuitive became painfully obvious. The greatest threat to any organization isn't disruption from the outside. It's the refusal to destroy within,
Wow.
which I thought was pretty
Yeah.
powerful.
And that goes back to Jack Welch's quote 20 plus years ago, that when the rate of change on the outside is faster than the rate of change on the inside, the end is near.
I have this quote hanging on my computer here. It says, change happens when the pain of staying the same becomes greater than the pain of making the change.
And that's part of the role of leadership. And this is part of the whole discipline called adaptive leadership. How do you pace the discomfort level at a point where people have the urge to change, but not push it so far where they either lock down or sabotage? Todd Bolsinger, he's taken the Heifetz and Linsky's work on adaptive leadership and made it very accessible.
Rex, can I jump in? One of the things too to realize is that during megatrend changes like this, that often people don't realize what they are changing to, and therefore there is no discomfort. For instance, when the minivan came out, no one was begging for a minivan. No one said, hey, you know what we need? We need minivans. And yet it was the thing that went to the market and outsold everything. The same thing happened when personal computers hit the desktop. No one was begging to have a personal computer on their desk. No one. But some companies and individuals realized that the pain would be there if we presented it as a pain point. And I believe this is what is happening in workforces now, is that there are some companies and or technologies that we will bring to the market that no one knew that they had that pain point, but it will immediately become a part of the workforce.
That's a great setup. I'm going to go up to the most recent message board here on Basecamp. So this interview with Rory Sutherland, who is the creative director for Ogilvy and Mather, goes right to your point and talks about how most leaders will get AI wrong, looking at it as an efficiency tool. And he uses examples of how we're measuring the wrong things. It's easy to measure efficiency, but it's not easy to measure value, the value that it brings to the human experience. This will relate to that, tied it to our industry, because if leaders look at AI as primarily an efficiency tool, and it does some things incredibly well. The business model, for example, architects have is doomed to their business model of describing and ascribing value as cost per square foot or cost per hour. That's gone because efficiency will wipe that out. When CAD first came out, I can remember some of those. Herman Miller had something, can't remember the name of that thing, but our dealership purchased a CAD machine that was $240,000. Plus we had, and this is in the 1980s, plus we had to hire a CAD operator at $80,000 a year in the 1980s. So an architect who's charging by the hour or by the pound of plans, all of a sudden they're having to make huge investment, but their billable hours drop by 90%. So there's a disincentive. Part of the change we're all going to have to look at, even me too, is the business model. What is the value that I bring? Because the analysis side is easy to do now. And I'm exploring this question, but this video by Rory Sutherland here, where there's a link, will take you to that conversation. And it's a great one to have.
Let me just propose this, because you help organizations change. And what I'm seeing is with all these efficiencies, updates are going to start happening faster and faster because they're going to be less human. They're going to be more AI generated. Organizational change is going to become something that's so critical to any organization staying alive. And don't we see a future here where the best organizations are the ones that can adapt more quickly. And that ramp is just going to go straight up like that. Isn't coaching and change management going to become more and more important in the coming years?
Yeah, I think it is. But at the same time, my charging per hour or scope, which is basically a different version of charging per hour, I've got to rethink that because my role and the leverage I can bring a company is a lot more now. Yesterday, for example, with the CEO of a 3,000 person company, he's been coming to me on one off, give me an analysis of these two people and how they can work better together. He just did that yesterday. He got all the strengths of the people in their division, got the role that they have. I've got feedback from him on where it's working well and where it's not. I can do such a deep dive analysis, and I've done it 4 times for him already. And I just asked him the question, what if I could give you a playbook of every employee you've got on how to optimize their performance and how they work better with their boss and with their team? Now, I can create that analysis in an hour, full report, different layers of reports. So I have to step back and think of, wow, I have the potential of giving this person a playbook for 3,000 employees that the CEO has found incredibly valuable and comes back to me time and time again. This is so helpful for me. Or I'm going into a conversation, help me with this conversation here. And I've got the ability to say, give me your top 10 employees in this, let's say sales, and your bottom 10, let me analyze and look for patterns and help you define an interview criteria for new people. I'm in a whole different world than I ever thought I would be with this. That's why I'm thinking, gosh, what would the value be and how would I charge for that? Am I going to charge $150 a report, $500 a report? What is the structure? What's the value? And I think every company has a different version of asking what that question is.
I just think what you're talking about is so human, though, that endless data doesn't solve the problem, right? Giving them telephone books full of data doesn't solve the problem as much as you being on site and talking to humans does.
But 80% of what I give somebody is insight. And what I'm able to do with the data, with my unique 25 years of doing this, I understand this person's world. So I can partner with AI to scale my insight in a way. And then on individual need basis, there's the human side of it. So again, I don't have any answers. This has just opened up a whole new window for me to explore.
I'm just thinking about the whole prediction market thing, and if there's a way you can apply that to the organization to answer some of those questions.
One thing we can answer is their inherent willingness to embrace change or the pace that they can embrace change. And again, we can look at how people are wired because we know someone with deliberative and analytical is going to be much more cautious in embracing change than people with activator, futuristic, strategic. So now we can create an index on the natural ability to change or the strategy with the talent you've got on how to pace that change going through the leadership, because that's the big friction point for every company is the company's ability to adapt and adopt something new. It's the human dynamics, as Michael was saying.
Rex, can I jump in here real quick?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think it's really interesting. So the reason I missed the first session is because I was actually interviewed on Oprah's podcast, and I was a audience guest because I'm launching a new book. But the main guest was a woman named Jean Twenge. You may have heard of her. She wrote a book about generation. She's a researcher from San Diego, I think. She's fascinating. One of the things that she talked about in this interview with Oprah is that we have gone from a slow change, high friction world to a fast change, low friction world. And really looking across generations at some of the friction that we're seeing is those of us who grew up in this analog first world, slow change, high friction. our brains aren't wired to adapt at the pace that things are changing right now. Versus if you look at some of these younger generations that have grown up in this fast change, low friction world, we question, do they have enough grit? So I think some of this resistance to change that you're talking about is this low to high grit world, and like we're evolutionarily not quite adapted for it.
Yeah, we're not wired to understand exponential change. We understand linear change, that tomorrow will be a little bit like yesterday. And then we extrapolate that out. We need systems models and simulation models to be able to look at that. And to your point, Amanda, remember when we were talking about digital natives and digital immigrants, and I'm a digital immigrant? We've now got the reverse. We've got in real life immigrants, these people who grew up as digital natives or social media natives. The research over and over is that they struggle with in real life conversations, whether it's in romance or conflict or office dynamics. I think it's fascinating that we've got in real life immigrants now. The skills that I grew up with as a boomer are actually more rare, and what's rare is more valuable. That's a whole nother kind of matrix and grid that's fascinating to explore.
Rex, I'm thinking you were talking earlier about the architectural profession and some of their resistance to change. And I feel that profession has grown up with this sort of tradition of what an architect is or an architect should be. I feel like that that's one of the anchors that holds that profession back from, I think, applying some of these new concepts and new technologies.
And the whole principal compensation model and the reward structure and the professional services business model is now obsolete, whether it's McKinsey, Deloitte, me, architects, and this will be an interesting migration. Moving to what I think is the most pertinent presentation for us to consider, because it deals directly with how do we move into creating agents and looking at that. This is the presentation by Sandy Carter at South by Southwest. So it's the 7 AI trends you're missing. This is a summary of it. Then I've got the actual link to the presentation at the top, and a barcode, a scan code at the bottom on how to get started if you're using Claude to create your first agent. So I'm going to challenge all of us, me included, and that includes my trying to figure out how to migrate all of my stuff from OpenAI to Anthropic. And so this will be part of the next conversation. And then Joseph, in our next conversation, I want to make sure the date works for you. And then Dan Tubbs will bring his expert in Claude Code and looking at how we move forward with that. And then Trey Ryan will also be on. He's the programmer that was on last week, where their programmers are programming in Claude. I want us all to feel comfortable with moving in this direction, creating an agent, and then eventually a digital twin. Does anybody gets to look at this presentation here, the 7 trends that you're missing? This presentation will blow your mind. This was a 2-hour conversation. I clipped 11 minutes out of it. Peter Diamandis and his cohort of 4 people are probably 4 of the top minds in the world of AI, and they've all got agents. So they talk in terms of how many tokens they're using a week. They have a utopian outlook on where all this is headed. I don't agree with a lot of that. They also think humans are primarily math, compute oriented objects. So they don't understand the human side of all of this. They see this as leading to abundance with about 5 years of disruption. But what they do provide is understanding where the ethos of this industry is and what the leading edge looks like in terms of business application. Bob, did you watch this
I
11-minute clip?
Yeah,
What was your reaction? What was your takeaway?
I was taken by how they measured the way they were using AI in terms of the tokens. And I got the sense they were just trying to push as much through the pipe as they could and seeing how it reacted and what came out.
And part of what they were talking about is how, was it PwC that was requiring that their partners use so many tokens and they get a token allowance? And
Well,
then what?
yeah, I got the sense that the metric was these tokens, which is the amount of AI that they're using in
Which is
terms of,
expensive. We're budgeting $10,000 per employee in token use.
Rex, if I could for a second, just two observations.
Yeah.
One, when I worked at Google, there was a period of time where my performance assessment was based off of how much I posted on Google Circles. Complete garbage, but literally it's a metric. And if you didn't meet it, you got a negative performance review. So humans are going to do what they're incentivized to do. My favorite word, by the way. Two, just so everyone is on the same page about the magnitude of change, the amount of money that cost into building and running these facilities, the facility costs 20% of the actual cost. So the machines cost 400 times the cost of a building. The amount of money being spent, the only way that it gets capitalized and actually becomes remotely profitable for businesses is labor disruption at a massive scale. $10,000 per employee isn't even covering the cost of what it really is. We're in the early days of Uber right now. Everyone's losing money hand over fist making this happen. The only way that folks like PricewaterhouseCoopers can actually be successful long-term with this is it's one for one. It's like you might be paying an employee $250,000, but you're expecting them to gain $250,000 more, and that check is getting written not to PwC, but that check is going to be written to the OpenAIs, the Gemini,
Right.
everyone else like that. That amount of money transfer must occur behind the scenes. That's the part of the
Yes.
equation that's still missing from all this.
And to get back to the metrics, what this conversation talks about is that they will evaluate the effectiveness of the tokens by comparing each person's output, whether it's a revenue output or innovation output or whatever. And they'll use AI to compare each person's use of AI to come up with some framework of what's an effective use, what's not an effective use. If that goal is that we're giving you $10,000 of compute to use, but what we're going to expect is that your productivity is going to be double or 2.5 times you. We're going to also assume that's going to dramatically lower the employee headcount. But there's something called Jevons law, that is, the cost of something goes down, the use actually goes up. We saw that with Uber. As the cost of hailing a cab reduced, it actually increased the amount of use. And so as these companies are looking at what Waymo is doing, the new race is going to be robo-taxis between Tesla and Waymo. Those are the two main people going. And they're looking at the cost per mile eventually getting down to about 30 cents per mile, which is about 1/10 of what it costs now. But in doing so, it'll be cheaper than having a car. So what they're looking at, this time of disruption, but use will actually go up. We're going to see these things and again, make a linear calculation that, okay, we're going to cut headcount because we're more efficient. But Jevons law says that means I can move into more industries, I can expand the services, just like what I'm looking at. I'm expanding my service capabilities, and instead of having 5 consultants that can do the work and that would do the evaluation of employees, I can do the work of end consultants if I'm analyzing a company. I highly recommend watching this, and we can react to it in the next conversation. The other one here, and these are all in the message board, so you can just go up the message board. I took Bob's 2026 State of the Workplace report, and I created a debate over remote and hybrid versus return to office. And it was a fascinating debate. Bob's commented on that. It really captured the debate well. Jim and I went through and evaluated the full report and then came up with this really tight way to frame the debate. The last one here, again, which we started off with, is more of the human side around marketing and the importance of recognizing there's value that's hard to measure, that's more valuable than the things we do measure. As we're moving in this world, how do we embrace and adopt that? These are some of the conversations I've set up. What I'd like to get from now is some of your interest. Is this moving in the right direction if we frame the next conversation around how do we create agents and digital twins with 3 subject matter experts? Is that a good next conversation to have? Are there other challenges that you're facing that I can either be researching and loading up on Basecamp? Third question, is the framework of Basecamp a useful tool for me to filter in information to seed the conversations we're going to have? Let's take 3 or 4 minutes just for feedback, questions, reactions.
I still have a lot of questions about how humans are going to handle this pace of change. And I think that's something not, we're talking a lot about the advancements, but we're just not talking about how people can absorb them.
Yeah, and Alvin Toffler addressed that in Future Shock, written in 1970. And the whole idea of future shock is the same concept of culture shock. You go to another country and you go through this psychological kind of stand in the gears, gridlock, depression, isolation, because you can't speak the language, you don't know the customs. And he applied that to the future, that we're moving so fast that we have this psychological break. I wrote about the same thing in 2004 in the book, The Millennium Matrix. And I called it vertigo, that we're going through a social version of vertigo where we're losing our ability to stand on stable ground. So we're always in this disruptive mode and can't get our equilibrium back.
It's exponential too, because when it hits society, it doesn't just hit you, it hits every family member, it hits every friend, it hits every coworker.
If that's a topic we need or want to address, we can set that up as either the future topic. What I'd like feedback on are the topics you're most interested in, so I can help set up those conversations going forward.
I'll jump in just to what I put in the chat as far as what really interests me. As much as I agree with Michael and I love the idea of what does this mean for humans, it's just so big. Selfishly, my interest is really in understanding a little more niche to the world I live in. Not that we have to go here, but my 2 cents about how it's going to shape the specifics of architecture and design, like the process of building physical space, and even beyond that, how it will affect the need for physical space, right? Or the design of physical space. So both the process and the end product. What might this shift and change? We are launching a big study right now to Rex's conversation about this digital versus analog natives and all of this. One of the things I challenge in the book is that it's really shifting how we think about physical space. We're pushing analog natives to think digital first in this book. And our new study is really pushing a too far digital world to think about the role of physical space, the investment of the ROI of physical space, maybe in a different light. I would really love kind of some of these big brains here. I'd love anything we want to discuss around the design of physical space or the process of physical space and how that might change in the future.
That's a great topic, and that's near and dear to several of us here. One of the underlying principles of all tools is that when a new tool comes out, whether it's a hammer or AI, it has an inherent operating system and how to optimize it. Kevin Kelly's book, What Does Technology Want, is an example of that. Marshall McLuhan, The Medium is the Message. So part of it is understanding what AI does best. And then the organizations that are able to redesign themselves, the structure, the business flow process, the training, the talent, all of that, they're going to thrive. Whoever optimizes the tool best. That's why native companies, the companies that grew up like the Netflixes, these were the early companies in understanding what distributed capabilities were and what the long tail meant in terms of value generation. Blockbuster got their value out of a storefront that had the blockbusters, and they could only handle 10,000 to 30,000 movies. What Netflix was able to do is they got 10% of their revenue from the blockbusters, but they had an unlimited shelf space of content. Most of their revenue came from what they called the long tail. In a corporation, the long tail, the untapped talent are the people. That's the long tail of an organization. When we show up to work every day, companies only see 5% of what we're capable of providing them. And so we haven't even addressed the hidden talent that we have. And again, space is part of that. We go to a department, we go to an office. I've developed a concept called the fourth place, which is a thought experiment around how do we tap into the long tail of an organization in both a software platform that looks at the supply of talent and capabilities we have and the demand, and how do we bring that together. Part of it is understanding what does technology want, and then what is the constraint that mobile technology has on us, because we've got these generations of digital, distributed, mobile, social, and now AI, and they have inherent operating systems. Most of us are still set up in the industrial model. Hierarchy, silos, linear business thinking, training, and talent. That'll be a fascinating conversation.
I think is really interesting because I feel like we have to understand the technology and AI first before we can design a space that's going to enable people and support people. And I'll use like a Formula One race car as an example. That cockpit is that driver's workspace. That car has one mission: to get that driver around the course as quickly as possible, allowing him to perceive all of the issues that he's going to confront, and gives him all the control that he needs to get around that race course. The workplace should not be any different. But if we don't understand the technology and how that technology is going to use and where it's going to take us, then I don't think we can effectively design a work environment for that.
And to your point, there's several different kinds of races. There's Indy races, NASCAR, and all of those vehicles are optimized for the kind of race that it is.
Even the UPS driver has a customized truck that he drives around.
I think that's a great metaphor and a great analogy for going forward.
The one thing, though, that we need to understand, too, is that we keep developing spaces inadequately for work instead of adequately developing spaces for people who, when doing their work, want to belong in a way that is significant to them. And so another framework that I hope we don't miss is this framework of proxemics that we can develop around public, social, personal, and intimate spaces where people belong. And in that, technology can have an effect on that. But it all comes down to how do we get our employees to continue to have a significant understanding that they belong.
We're at the end of our time. I'm going to make a plug for Joseph's book, Search for Belonging, which addresses that. It was a bestseller. It's how I met Joseph 20 years ago. To close this up with I want to make sure people do have access and do use Basecamp and give me feedback on what's valuable. We'll set up the next session around the agents. And we're moving into an era of bespoke capabilities. If you look at Alpha School and how they're tailoring education to each student, I think that's a metaphor going forward, that space will be bespoke to whatever race that employee is in. The constraints we have is the developer market and the commercial real estate market that have a financial and business model that looks at creating comparables, not bespoke real estate and buildings. So that'll be an interesting tee up for the next conversation. So thank you for joining in today. Thank you. Highly energizing. I think we could have gone for another good bit of time. Take care.